two protests. There's one over there for Palestine, and there's one over there for general. There's one over there, Palestine. You might be able to see the Palestinian flag over there. You can see the Palestinian flag there. And there's one over there for a general protest. It seems to be some kind of British nationalist protest. He keeps on saying, "We are the 90%. We are the people." So there's one over there as well. And what I'm worried about, what concerns me, there's loads of police around the corner over there. What I'm concerned about is that basically the protest is going to break out and these two are going to fight. Because basically the Palestinians are going to be annoyed that these guys are not protesting for the same thing as they're protesting. It could either be that they find a harmonization between them and say, oh, we're both protesting the governments of the world, so we're both in the right and we're both friends. Or they might say, why are you not on our side? Why are you not standing with us? Why are you standing over there? So it could get nasty. All those people over there, you won't be able to see it too clearly because of the rain on the window, but all those people over there are basically protesting the something to do with the British government or something. There's lots of people there, so it's organized. It's an organized rally, and you can see them all there. And then these guys over here, a smaller number, and they're all shouting to compete. They're all competing. One of them over there's got a megaphone. That guy's got a speaker. You know, there you can see all the police vans just lining up, waiting for something to happen. Hopefully nothing does happen. Because if there is a ground assault in Israel, in Palestine, if there's a ground assault in Israel or Palestine, however you choose to look at it, what will probably end up happening is that there'll be a civil war, and that civil war the ramifications of that will spill out over here and in all different places of the world. That's what will probably happen, is that the ramifications of that civil war will just spill out and it'll just get nasty. People will just be taking each other out in different corners of the world, and it could even spill out into a world war, but we're not expecting that, but it's possible. And you know, the death of prominent figures usually triggers something at a grassroots level, triggers anger and frustration and resentment at a grassroots level, and that can spill out into conflict. So I'm actually just leaving the town now, so I'm not going to cover it. Could have stood there and covered it, but I actually have work to do, some artwork that I'm working on. I have to go home and continue with that. And I'd much rather do that than stand in the rain and possibly end up in a fight, breaking up my equipment, or having my things stolen by pickpockets roaming through the crowd. You can see two guys over there smoking weed, smoking marijuana. Then all these folks outside here basically doing their shopping and whatnot. For some people it's an ordinary day. For the people who are in the gardens over there that we just looked at, they might not have such an ordinary day. I hope I don't see them on the news later. They seem to be busy making some kind of film about Cruella de Vil. They just called it Cruella. So these days, instead of making a film about the protagonist, about the victim, saying, oh, isn't it sad that these Dalmatians were getting hunted by this woman Cruella de Vil, now they're making a film about it's called Cruella, starring Emma Stone. They're making a film about Cruella herself, how she got to be who she was. And sometimes some people might think, oh, look at that and say, okay, that's obviously the reason why they're doing that is because they want to do a character study on Cruella de Vil and work out what's made her the way she is. so that they can justify people being wicked and people being cruel and mean and evil. So that's basically what's going on there. Or they're doing it so that they can say, so not so that they can justify it, but so that they can look at the film. Like, how many people go to watch the protagonist of a film don't have some kind of empathy and affiliation with the protagonist of the film? Even something like Scarface. You see, Scarface has come from a country where there's a corrupt regime, and they've corrupted the people in the country. He's come over to America to try and make something of himself, and it's a tragic story of how, because of the choices that he makes and the way he just recklessly kills people, he ends up getting hurt. But the people who go to watch Scarface, especially the men, they don't come out of the film saying, "Oh, Scarface, what a terrible man." They come out of the film saying the words that Scarface was saying because of the cool accent that Al Pacino portrayed the character in. They don't come out of the film saying, "Oh, how terrible a guy, he shot all those people and murdered all those people." They come out of the film trying to assimilate with his character and trying to mimic his traits so that they can adopt those traits and bring them into their own existence, bring them into their own life. When they bring them into their own life, that's where the trouble starts. And that's what the purpose of most films is to actually corrupt, not to edify. If it was to edify, you'd have a lot more righteous characters in the screen rather than seeing all these monsters and these terrorists and evil men. They're basically trying to say every human being, no matter what they do, is a good person, which is not true. Some human beings are so corrupt, they've just become reprobate. And that's what you have to accept. Some human beings have just actually fallen so far away from being good that, they just corrupt everything around them, and people would call that toxic, say that human beings actually become toxic. The toxic isn't quite the word, because you have many toxic people who are not reprobate. Some people are toxic because of they mistake the exigency of good. They mistake they make mistakes in how they carry out goodness and how they perpetrate goodness. It's not their fault necessarily. Some people, they condone all sorts of evil behaviors and dangerous behaviors, and they condone rape and all sorts of child molestation and pedophilia and all of this stuff. They condone it because they're like, oh, that person at heart, they had a hard time, so that's how they became like that. And they just end up becoming so soft that they just basically watch the world just get more and more corrupt, and they have nothing to object. They don't have nothing to contribute by way of saying, how do we make it better? They just say, oh, if everybody's really nice to each other, then we make it better. But when everybody's just being really nice to each other, you lose admonition. And it's through admonition that children become creative, and children they try to find, it's admonition that causes us to find different ways of doing things. So if you want to become an artist, let's say, or you're a child and you've got an excellent eye for, you can draw a picture really accurately. You can draw a picture really accurately and just basically depict it. And then you say, oh, I want to depict the sensuality. So let's say this child's 7 years old, and he says, okay, I want to depict the sensuality of mankind. So he starts going out seeking for seeking for newspapers with naked women in them. Somebody tells him that thing exists, and he sees on television that exists, and he goes seeking it out and starts drawing detailed pictures of naked women. A 7-year-old boy. His mom is probably, and his dad is probably going to be, well, his dad, depending on who his dad is, might either congratulate him on his success or say to him, probably perceiving that the kid's probably going to become a heterosexual. He's going to see him and he's going to be like, okay, he's going to congratulate him, or he's going to punish him. He's going to admonish him and say, I don't want you to draw those pictures until you're older, or I don't want you to draw those pictures at all. But through that correction, that child, if he receives the correction, he's going to, depending on how severe the correction is, he might receive it or not receive it, or how well placed it is, he might receive it or not receive it. But depending on that correction and the deliberation of that correction, he's going to find a new way to do something. So by being admonished, through being admonished by his mom, or more specifically his dad, he's going to find a new way. He's going to say, well, maybe I shouldn't draw the naked women. Maybe I should try drawing some kind of trees, or some kind of natural phenomenon, or cars, or something else that represents the sensuality. And he could become an automation designer. See all those cars out there? You know, he could become an automation designer. He could draw, become very skillful at, end up working for Audi or for Porsche, because if he's decided to start drawing the curves of a woman and start imagining what a good car, what makes a good car, or what makes a streamlined car. So you begin to think of it along those lines, and admonishment becomes a good thing. But admonishment isn't for children only. Admonishment is for adults, which is why we have correctional facilities. We have correctional facilities to basically to teach people that, you know, what they have been doing is wrong, why it's wrong, and how hard they need to think about changing from doing what they've been doing to doing something else. Say somebody's a thief or a robber, or some kind of or a rapist. You know, they'll be thrown in prison, they'll be put in prison, and in prison they'll be taught, they'll be deprived of certain freedoms that they had before, to the point where they might say to themselves, okay, I'm not going to do the thing I was going to do before because it gets me in more trouble. But largely, and more often than not, because the admonishment and the idea of correctional facilities, putting them all together, you know, you just create a community of criminals, and they begin to try and find out how they can crack business deals and develop and get into make some more money together. Because largely, I've been in a correctional facility at some point, and largely what's going on there is basically you get intimidated by the other people who are there, because you recognize that many of the people who are there are dangerous individuals, and if you were to get into an altercation or a disagreement with those people, you could find yourself in some serious trouble. So most people say to themselves when they're in those facilities, what I'm going to do is I'm going to become all things to all men. I'm going to equip myself in such a way that the people will both be afraid of me, afraid of damaging or hurting or getting into an altercation with me, or they'll want to work with me at some point. So you say you get two people who leave the prison on the same day, they become great friends, they're probably going to meet up afterwards and start some kind of racketeering business, or start some kind of business where they're going to be able to do stuff together. So that's an example of where admonishment, that's an example of a situation where admonishment and discipline and punishment has not worked. But for the most part, if you tell a woman who's dressed, for example, she's wearing, let's not even say a short skirt, she's dressed in really skimpy clothing, or she's dressed in all black with a big massive Satanist star on her chest, and she's got all the black eyeliner and black lipstick like I just saw back there, dressed up like a witch. You go and actually say to that person something that nobody else was willing to say. You say to them something like, you're better than this, basically. And the long and short thing, say, you don't have to do that. You know, there's somebody who created this world, you know, there's somebody who created this universe who doesn't dress like you dress. He dresses differently, and he expects people to live up to his standard. He doesn't adopt and stoop to their standard. You know, if there is a God, he definitely doesn't dress in black leather with a dog collar around his neck and a big Satanist star on his chest. You know, because he doesn't represent that. He's a force for good. He's not a force for corruption, which is what Satanism represents. the legitimization, the legitimacy, or the active endorsement of illegitimacy. That's what it represents. It's a religion for people who stand on the opposite side of goodness, for people who don't fit in, who don't fit into the typical picture of what it means to be a good person. I mean, for example, they might have discovered as they were getting older that they wanted to watch a different kind of pornography. They wanted to see a pornography where people were perhaps trapped in dungeons and mutilating one another, or they might even go further than that to watch the dark web, to see people getting killed on camera and stuff like that. And then they realize, oh, this means that I've got a dark soul. So they started wanting to tell the world about it. So they went out and bought a black skirt, a black fishnet tights. They went out and bought some black lipstick and some amulets with devils on them. And they went and bought some T-shirts with too many lines on them, too many angles and tangents on them. And then they said, okay, I'm complete now, because the things that are going on inside my heart are now manifested on the outside, and now everybody who's just like me will be drawn to me. And that's all what fashion is. You know, fashion is just basically a way for people to say, for people to attract like-minded people, for people who reflect what they agree with, or if somebody's fashion sense isn't formulated yet or isn't specific, they might team up with some friends in college or university who are going to make their fashion sense more specific and say, oh no, I think you should try on this black skirt, or I think you should try on the black lipstick, just like me. You know, and that's what the Eminem song is about. Don't you want to grow up to be just like me? That song is just like, it's criticizing the fact that we have a system whereby it's so easy for people who are of different persuasions to end up walking in the same path. The Bible says, how can two walk together unless they be agreed? So it's talking about that Belial conspiracy that basically the government and the governments of the world and the powers that be and the principalities and powers are basically trying to get us all to become one person, to have one mind, to have the same feelings about everything. So if somebody says to you, oh, I'm from the LGBT community, I like to have sex with other men, you say, oh, that's good for you. I'm so happy that you found the right way for you to express yourself. Another person might say, well, what you're actually doing is you're damaging your sphincter by having anal sex. You're damaging your sphincter to the point that you're gonna live a much shorter life than other people, because as soon as your sphincter gives up and can't work anymore, you can no longer hold your food and your body gives up. Your heart breaks. You die. So by damaging that, you're actually cutting years off your life, even if you don't get AIDS or HIV or syphilis or one of these diseases, or chlamydia, which is all those diseases are more likely to affect people in the homosexual community than they are likely to affect people who are married in heterosexual relationships, let's say. So it's very interesting that we have a world where basically you can have a war like that, and then you have people calling each other up and saying, okay, let's go out and protest the fact that the governments of the world are doing weird things. But people go to those rallies for different reasons. Some people go because they've had an argument with their wife and they saw the advertisement on the television and they just want to vent some anger by doing some shouting. Other people go because they feel deeply passionate about the situation. Others go because they want to find out more about what the situation is. Some people will join the rally without knowing that the rally was going to take place, just because they see the banners and they're like, hey, yeah, I agree with that. I've got nothing else to do. I finished my shopping. I can easily go and join that. It's an existentialist dilemma, whether or not you're going to be the kind of person who is lured into that kind of environment. I tend not to rally. I tend not to join rallies. I think I went on maybe one march when I was younger, and I was just kind of hang around the peripheries of marches because they're actually very dangerous places. Not just dangerous in the sense that people tend to target rallies. Terrorists tend to target rallies. They see a group of people together who are not believing, who are not championing the same causes they're championing, and they say, okay, let's take some of them out. But not just dangerous for that, but they're dangerous ideologically, because you can actually get coerced into believing something which actually goes against the things that you genuinely believe. You can just start saying stuff because you think it sounds good, which is another existentialist dilemma. You know, you can just end up saying stuff because you think it's going to sound good, or because you think it's going to make other people like you, or make other people think, oh, he's really considerate, or he's got he's got his head screwed on right. You know, you could go and join one of those rallies for that reason. You basically got a lot to think about as a human being in terms of who do I want to assimilate with, what kind of groups do I want to associate myself with. You know, these are real choices that don't just apply to young people. They apply to middle-aged, young adults. They apply to all sorts of people. Any kind of person who basically has left one ideology and swapped over to another. For example, you have people who grew up from the age of 16 to the age of, let's say, 27, drinking alcohol. You know, obviously not drinking water. Everybody has to get some water in the system. But they grew up drinking alcohol, and they basically hung around with other people who like to drink alcohol. But at some point, their health got into a health dilemma, into a health crisis, and they basically had to stop drinking. So they stopped drinking, so they don't see all the people who they used to drink with, because the temptation to drink when they go out with those people is too high, or they found something else to replace it. Maybe they've turned to Christianity, or even become a Buddhist or a Hindu or something, and they say, oh, I'm not going to drink, I'm not going to take poison into my system, I'm just going to drink water and do my exercises, do my yoga, or I'm going to pray, or depending on what you're doing, on what religion you subscribe to. So basically, you know, you have these people who will make a life choice at the age of 30 or 50. Somebody says, oh, I'm no longer I'm getting older now, so I'm going to try and stop saying swear words. I'm going to try and stop cussing. So I say, okay, I'm not going to do any more of that cussing. So all the people that I used to hang around with and I used to spend my time with and talk to on the phone, I'm not going to speak to them anymore, because when I speak to them, they cuss, and they encourage me to take up cussing. And even if I don't cuss with them, you know, I'll end up cussing in my dreams, because those words will get into my subconscious. They'll just hammer. What I feel about cussing is, I feel like people are just basically just corrupt. It's just a force of corruption. It's a force of evil. You know, it's not innocent as many people make out. It's a force to corrupt young children and to corrupt people who are basically trying to walk the straight and narrow. They don't want to mess up, but everyone's obviously gonna mess up. But if you don't want to mess up, you're gonna mess up a lot less than somebody who doesn't mind messing up, or who wants to mess up. So with cussing, you have somebody who says, okay, I don't want to cuss anymore because the temptation's too great. But what I feel about cussing is a force of evil, as I was saying, because it gets into your subconscious. So if you're, for example, a Christian, and you really believe that Christ is not going to accept people who cuss. Some Christians believe that they can cuss on their deathbed, and they can be saying all sorts of swear words, and Christ will say, oh, because you believed in me, you can still come in, you can still come to heaven, that it's going to be all right for you, which I don't believe is true. I believe that your deeds, you're going to be judged according to your deeds. So if, for example, you are on your deathbed and one of those old friends who you used to cuss with comes to you and starts saying the F word and the S word and the B words and saying all these words, and then you join in and just start saying, oh yeah, anyway, you know, it doesn't matter, and just basically join in with him with your last breath, you're probably not going to end up inheriting what you thought you were going to inherit.
on pure faith alone. So this is where Lutherans fall short. They say, oh, it's by faith alone, but what does faith entail? What comes along with faith? This is what James is talking about. In James 1 or something, I think it might be James 2, where he says faith without works is dead. What he's not talking about, what he is talking about is he's basically saying your faith has to take on a characteristic. Faith isn't just a thing that exists in the ether and just doesn't mean anything. You know, faith actually takes a shape, it takes a form. As in, if you say, oh, I believe in God, or I believe that God cusses, for example, there's people out there who believe that. They quietly believe that God cusses, that Jehovah swears, and says swear words when he gets frustrated. And you might say to yourself, okay, yeah, if you just believe that with all your heart, then you'd be cussing all you wanted. You'd be cussing all you wanted, and you wouldn't care about cussing, because you said the person who is the most advanced and the most supreme being in the entire universe does what I do, so he doesn't mind that I do what I do. So you could cuss on your deathbed and you go to the grave believing that you were going to be accepted into the kingdom of heaven, if that's what you believe. Or you can be somebody who believes that cussing is of the devil, as many Christians do believe, and say that saying cuss words were invented by the Illuminati and by the Freemasons, and before that by the mystery schools in Egypt, to basically take people away from a righteous mentality into a mentality which was corrupt and base. And you could basically believe that, and you say, okay, if I'm cussing on my deathbed, I'm not going to be accepted into the kingdom of heaven. So you would say to the person who you knew was going to come into the room, into the room where your deathbed was, and basically start cussing, you'd say to them, don't turn up, don't come in. That's what you'd basically say to them. You'd say, don't come here, stay away. I want to go to the grave in peace. I don't want to go to the grave feeling anxious about whether or not I'm going to go to hell or not. So that could be a way that you would think about it. But that's how I feel about cussing. It's a corruption. It's from the devil. Obviously, not everybody believes that, because not everybody wants to be a Satanist. But, you know, it's of the devil. It's of Satan, you know. And obviously, it's not something that a Christian who loves Christ would actually engage in. Just like a Christian who loves Christ would not engage in homosexual behavior. They'd say, you know what, I love Christ, so I'm going to deny myself this excess, which I don't need. You know, they'd say, I'm going to deny myself that, I'm going to refuse that, and I'm going to let somebody else who doesn't care about Christ to go ahead and do that. So it's the same thing. So a lot of these corruptions were invented by the mystery schools and have been taken up by the Freemasons and the Freemasonic societies, who are basically trying to indoctrinate people into a way of evil, to cause people to sin, to cause people to fall, so that as many people as possible can keep each other company in a place which burns with fire and brimstone. That's what they want. You know, they want, you know, if you've ever hung around with somebody who's an evil person, or who you think now to be an evil person, or who swears and who steals and who curses and who does all this wicked stuff, you know that they do not want to be alone in that. They don't want to spend the whole day cussing by themselves. They expect you as their friend to join in with them and to do the same thing that they're doing. So if somebody's smoking weed, he's going to share his weed. If he's got friends, he's going to share his weed with his friends. And if one of the friends says, oh, I don't want to smoke that, they're going to get laughed at. They're going to get laughed out of the park, because they're going to say to them, why don't you want to smoke with us? Hey, do you think you're better than us? And they're going to say all of this sort of stuff that's basically intended to coerce that person into thinking that they're a fool for not engaging in the thing. And actually, they're very smart for deciding not to smoke, because that smoke's going to go into their lungs. It's going to make them addicted. The nicotine in there and the weed in there is going to make them addicted to the high of being out of control. And all the while it's doing that, it's actually going to destroy their body from the inside out and give them a much shorter, much more miserable, much more dependent life. But that's corruption. That's how Satan works. He's set up and he's placed people in every corner of society, including the church and including the Catholic Church. He's got people everywhere who are basically going to stop a person who's genuinely pursuing after righteousness. He's going to try and stop them from ever attaining righteousness and from ever living a clean life. So he's going to place people in every corner of the society. So if you work as a builder, you're going to find that a lot of builders swear. So if you were to fall off that building and you weren't wearing a harness, you were to fall off the side of the building and you just been having a conversation where you've been swearing and the last word you said was the F word, where do you think you're going to go? What do you think is going to happen? You know, if you believe that there is anybody who has a responsibility for instantiating this existence that we live in right now, then you have an existentialist dilemma as somebody who swears, whether or not you want to continue doing that and disrespecting him and setting up a rule whereby you're going to have to get out quick when the time comes for you to die. You're going to have to very quickly say an honest prayer, which is going to basically, but that's not a way to live. And it's a trick anyway. That idea of saying, oh, I'm going to live my life like a monster, and then at the very last minute I'm going to say, oh God, I'm really sorry about all those murders that I committed and all those people who I led into Satanism and Luciferianism and paganism. I'm just going to say a very quick prayer just in case I find out that what the Christians were saying was true. The real Christians, what they were saying was true. God's going to know that you're trying to pull the wool over his eyes, and he's going to cuss you out at the end of the time. He's going to say, I don't want you around because you spent all your life doing that and you thought you could get away with it. It's the same thing for these homosexual Christians, the ones who say that they're Christians, say that they love Christ, and yet they'll go and spend time with a man in a situation which they call loving, while they're actually destroying one another's bodies. You know, that's not loving Christ. That's not Christ-like. So they're actually deceiving one another, and they're deceiving the whole of society, because you ask 9 out of 10 people in this society whether they think homosexuality is okay. You ask 9 out of 10 Caucasians at least whether they think homosexuality is okay. They'll say yes. They say, oh, it's up to the person to do what they want to do, which is partially true. It is up to them, but the consequences for doing whatever you think is what you want to do are also heavy. You know, especially for somebody who's engaging in grievous sin like that. So you have to make a choice, you know. For anybody watching this, you have to make a choice, you know. You have to get to the point where you actually begin to think about whether or not you want to associate with Belial. Belial is a word for Satan. Whether or not you want to associate with Belial, or whether you want to be Christ-like. You want to associate with the person who's actually instantiated the entire universe. And that's going to get more and more apparent as we spread out through the stars, and as this particular human race goes and colonizes other planets. It's going to get more and more apparent the nature of the Lord, the nature of God. That's all I have to say.